Welcome to Chronicles by Candlelight. Subscribing helps the channel grow and lets you stay updated with every new video so you never miss the content you enjoy. You are listening to Fracture. Episode 5, Reality. The best day of my life had suddenly become the worst. Oz was here in the Institute as well, and to make matters worse, he was stronger. What was this new crippling ability he had? This pressure felt like a vice was clamped tight against my chest, and to make matters worse, my knees shook like a pair of wind chimes. Now there was nothing stopping him from attempted murder. Oz laughed right in my face, a loud, mocking laugh that made the few students glance over with curiosity. "Look at you," he said. "To think a weakling like you actually made it here, that's hilarious." His grip tightened around my neck, pressing me harder into the wall as my head swam from the pressure pouring off him. It felt like standing under a waterfall made of weight. My lungs struggled to pull in air. "I knew you didn't belong back then," Oz continued, grinning down at me. "And you definitely don't belong here." My vision blurred for a second as I tried to steady myself. He drew his fist back. "Maybe I should send you back home early." Before the punch came, another hand suddenly clamped around Oz's wrist, and his fist stopped mid-air like it had hit an invisible wall. "Hey," a voice said calmly. "No fighting on campus, unless it's supervised." I turned my head to a guy standing beside us. He had a lollipop stuck out of the corner of his mouth, and he held a Nintendo Switch to his face with his other hand. He lowered his Switch, glanced between us briefly, then slipped it into his pocket and yawned. He had large, black, unbothered eyes like a robot's, completely devoid of emotion. He was youngish looking, at least a year or two younger than myself. Skinny build, medium height, and blonde, spiky hair. Oz frowned. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" he asked. The guy shrugged. "None of your business," he replied. "It is against the rules to fight on campus without supervision. Didn't you read your handbook?" Oz tried to yank his arm free. "Why don't you mind your damn business?" The guy's grip didn't move an inch. I watched the muscles in Oz's arm tense as he tried to pry himself loose. But nothing happened. His face burned red with irritation and shock. The guy just stood there, lollipop in his mouth, staring at Oz like this was nothing more than a mild inconvenience. "Whatever." Oz stopped pulling. The guy released him immediately. Oz adjusted his sleeve, then glared at the kid, shook his head, then settled back on me. "You got lucky today, Snow," he said. "Next time no one's going to stop me." Then he stormed off toward the main buildings, blending into the stream of students heading the same direction. The moment he disappeared into the crowd, the pressure in the air vanished, and I dropped to the ground. My head spun as I sucked in a long breath. The after effects of Oz's new ability was yet to wash off. How come it had no effects on the kid? I wondered. Suddenly I noticed a pair of bright white Nike Air Forces walk up to me. When I looked up, I found they belonged to the blonde girl from earlier. She stood there with her arms crossed, looking down at me like I was something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of her shoe. "I thought you might actually be strong." She shook her head slowly. Disappointment was sharp in her voice. "Especially after the way you spoke to me earlier." I opened my mouth to say something, but nothing came out. "But now I see you're just weak," she sighed and walked off. Another girl with blue-dyed hair followed her. The Nintendo kid stepped past me and popped the lollipop back into his mouth as he picked up his Switch again. I was still brushing dust from my jacket when one of the boys from their group stopped in front of me and extended a hand. "Up you go." The top of his head was so smooth it reflected the light, and his face had a perpetual brightness to it, with bold eyebrows and crinkles at the side of his eyes that looked like they were drawn on with urgent brush strokes. I hesitated for a second before taking his hand. Something about him made the tiny hairs on my arms rise. It wasn't anything obvious. His posture was relaxed, his expression neutral. But the closer he got, the more my body told me to flee. It was like standing too close to a wild animal at the zoo. However, I could tell he meant me no harm. He pulled me to my feet with surprising ease. I barely even had to push off the ground. "Thanks," I muttered. "You're very welcome." It was like he spoke in all caps. "I'm Jasper Bone. Nice to meet you." "I'm Reagan Snow," I replied. He nodded. "Nice to meet you, Reagan Snow." Jasper's gaze drifted briefly in the direction the blonde girl and the others had gone. "I'm looking forward to seeing what you can truly do," he said. Before I could ask what that meant, he turned and jogged a few steps to catch up with the others. Within seconds, he had slipped back into their group like he'd never left. I stood there for another moment, trying to shake the strange feeling he'd left behind. What the hell was up with the students here? Nintendo Boy didn't even flinch at Orz's crippling ability, and Jasper gave out the aura of a black bear. Suddenly I remembered that I needed to be getting to the hall. So without giving it further thought, I followed the flow of students toward the building. The induction hall was huge. Its ceiling stretched high overhead, supported by thick metal beams that crossed like ribs, and bright white lights ran along the length of the hall. 2 long lines of students dressed straight out of luxury magazines, wearing designer jackets and watches that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, snaked toward a pair of tables where 2 staff members sat behind computers. Some of them had already broken off into groups, while others stood quietly scrolling through their phones. They all looked like they had the potential to be dangerous, especially those 2 at the front, Jasper Bone and Nintendo Kid, who I saw entering the main hall. The members of staff were checking people in before letting them into the main seating hall. I joined the line, thinking this was a good opportunity to inform someone about my enrollment issue. The fact was I applied for the Security and Enforcement Department, but all around me signs advertised the Combat Department. And compared to the freaks I'd already met, Jasper, Orz, and the Nintendo Kid, I was definitely not equipped for this department. The line moved quickly. Each student stepped forward, gave a number, and was waved through within a minute or 2. Soon enough, I reached the front. A thin staff member with grey hair and narrow glasses looked up at me. "Admission number?" he asked. Actually, I leaned forward slightly and lowered my voice. "I think there's been a mistake." His fingers paused above the keyboard. "I believe I was supposed to be placed in the Security and Enforcement Department," I said quietly. "Not combat." The man looked at me with a glare that could kill. "Are you suggesting," he said slowly and adjusted his glasses, "that the administration of the Aetherium Institute made an error?" My stomach dropped. No, that's not what I meant," I said quickly. "I just think I might not belong in the combat department." He leaned back in his chair and looked me over from head to toe. Not subtly either. It was the kind of inspection you'd give a tool before deciding whether it was worth using. At the same time, a large crew cut guy stepped up to the other check-in station beside us. He looked like he'd walked straight out of a heavyweight fight. He had broad shoulders and thick, skull-crushing arms. The staff member glanced at him briefly, then looked back at me. "I see." His gaze drifted across my frame again. "You certainly do not appear particularly suited for combat." I wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or insulted. "Admission number?" he asked. 623641. I quickly recited. The clacking of keys filled the short silence between us. Then his eyebrows rose. He leaned closer to the monitor. For a moment I thought he'd finally found the mistake. "Yes?" I asked. The man straightened. "There is no error," he said. "What? That can't be possible," I argued. "The system confirms your placement." He tapped a few keys and nodded to himself. "Reagan Snow. Combat Department. Fully sponsored." "But..." "Next," he cut me off. The student behind me immediately stepped forward and brushed me aside. "Admission number," the staff member repeated, already ignoring me. I stood there for half a second longer, waiting for him to look back up at me. When he didn't, I had no choice but to step through the entry point and into the hall. The main hall was enormous. Rows of seats stretched across the wide floor in long curved sections and climbed gradually upward toward the back. Hundreds of students filled them. There had to be 400 or more people here, all talking at each other, their voices blending into a constant roar of conversation that echoed off the high metal ceiling. I found a seat at the back and looked to the front of the hall, where a raised stage stretched the entire width of the room. Several elderly officials sat there in oversized chairs that looked more like thrones than office furniture. Their robes and suits varied, but each of them carried the same quiet authority. Eventually, after all the students had come in, staff members moved down the aisles and closed the heavy doors at the back of the hall. The loud metallic thud echoed through the room, causing the chatter to slowly fade. From the stage, a tall man wearing an expensive suit stepped forward. A long goatee hung neatly from his chin, matched by a carefully groomed moustache. At the center of the stage, he spread his hands slightly. "Welcome," he said. "My name is Dean Samuel Althrew, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Combat Department of the Aetherium Institute." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. He smiled faintly. "Each of you sitting here today represents the top fraction of talent in the entire country." The hall went silent for a brief moment, and soon the entire room was clapping. The sound rolled through like thunder. Dean Althrew waited patiently with his hands clasped behind his back until the applause slowly faded. Only when the room settled again did he continue speaking. I'm glad to see such enthusiasm, he said. However, I must remind you of something important. The hall quieted till you could hear a feather drop. Getting into the Aetherium Institute was never the real challenge, he pointed out. The real competition begins now. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. What did he mean by that? What competition? You should have received an email after your check-in, he continued. That message contains your current ranking within the combat department. A ripple moved through the room as phone screens lit up all across the hall. I pulled my phone from my pocket. Aetherium combat ranking, the message read. I stared at it for a moment, trying to guess what rank I'd be. The message loaded quickly and my eyes went straight to the number. Rank. 500 over 500, points, 1. I was dead last. I felt sick. Around me, reactions exploded in every direction. Some students were clearly satisfied with what they saw. Others looked constipated, while a few faces tightened as they silently processed their positions. Your ranking reflects the initial evaluation conducted by the Institute prior to your arrival. It is merely a starting point. Dean Allthrough continued speaking. But it is not meaningless. The atmosphere in the hall shifted again. By the end of your first semester, he said, the bottom 20 students in this department will be removed from the Institute. A wave of whispers spread instantly across the room. What the hell did he mean by removed? Were they going to kick us out? Those students, he continued calmly, will be transferred to a feeder university where they may continue their education in a less demanding environment. More murmuring broke out. My chest felt heavy as my gaze drifted back to the number on my phone. I couldn't believe it. After everything it took to get into the Aetherium Institute, perfect distinctions in my exams, the arguments with my dad, and months stuck working at Matrix Labs, was I already on my way out? Subscribe for new episodes. See you next time.